reached the time of the year where coming outside makes you foggy for a couple minutes. Hey guys, welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather. As a reminder, we are growing in southwestern Kentucky, zone 7B, and this is my 5th gardening season. Check out this art, you guys. It's magical. So growing up along the arch, I have a couple different gourds. There's the birdhouse gourd, which I think is the more obvious gourd, the one that you can see a whole bunch of, even though there's fewer plants, than the loofah that I also have growing on here. I honestly think that the birdhouse gourd is starting to really overpower even the loofah. And this, all of this, is one plant. This here is the loofah gourd, and you can see the leaf shape of this. It's kind of like a cucumber where, here we go. See, this is the loofah, but over here, that's the birdhouse gourd. It's a lot more melon shaped. And I feel like I see a lot more of those leaves than these leaves. So I'm really hoping that my loofahs don't get completely shaded out. I think the saving grace for the loofahs is the fact that I have one on the end here. And I think that this one is gonna make it. The other one might too. We're just gonna have to see. I haven't really noticed many flowers. I did see that there's been a couple that have fallen off. I'm assuming that this is from the loofah gourd. There's a couple bugs in that one, but this is yellow, and the birdhouse gourd has white flowers. So I'm gonna put a clip in here of when we came out, me and Levi, to taste some of the birdhouse gourds last week. This has grown exponentially. So for all of you who have grown this before, you're probably not surprised, but holy cow, these things are amazing. I just can't wait to see big gourds like that just all hanging in here. It's going to be amazing. I have been very pleasantly surprised to see that we are able to harvest lots and lots of blackberries and the birds are not touching them. So recently in a vlog, I shared that the birds are kind of getting after my elderberries, and I kind of wonder if that's, you know, kind of one of those things, it's a give and take, that sometimes they'll go after one thing and that means that they'll leave the other thing alone. One thing that we have done to try and keep the birds occupied is we just put in a bird feeder on the other side of the house, hoping to kind of take their attention away from the garden. Because really, birds have been the biggest pest in the garden this year, which is really unusual. Usually we have a lot of bug pressure, and knock on wood, for some reason that has not been the case. At least not yet. I just found another volunteer. Looky! You guys know what this is? That's a cucamelon, and it's perfectly placed. Look at that. That is definitely one volunteer that I hoped to see this year. Last year we had all kinds of cucamelons. I think this is the exact little mini A-frame that I grew them on last year, but they just went wild. They went all up and over, and I haven't really noticed any, but there it is. And all we need is that one plant. That is also gonna go crazy. So one area that I want to make sure I really tackle today is this onion bed. It's kind of getting taken over by weeds. There's actually a couple volunteer borage flowers in here, and I did stick this okra in here too. So I'm ready for this to get a new life, because it's actually in our area not too late to keep putting seeds in the ground, especially for things like beans and summer squash. And honestly, I have grown watermelon from seed in July and gotten a harvest out of it. So there's a lot of things that can be planted. I plan on putting some more beans in here, but I'm getting these onions out. So we had a really cruddy onion harvest this year, which does happen. There are years where things just don't work out as you planned, and these are the size of the onions that we have this year. It's really probably not worth keeping or doing anything with, but I can add these to stuff, and so I'm gonna harvest them. I think one of our issues with the size of our onions is that we put in onion sets, and onion sets are those little miniature onions that you can see at the store, at the like farm store or wherever you buy your seeds. Sometimes you can buy them online. We've done that before too. And those are technically second year onions. Onions are biennial, and in their second year, they will put on flower bulbs. And it really hasn't been a problem for us to let the onions flower. We know that it will take down their storage life, but what I like to do is dice up and freeze my onions anyway, so it hasn't really bothered me to ever let my onions flower. But this year it seems like it didn't really pay off. The onions put a lot of energy into these flowers and essentially no energy into the bulb, because these are really small and sad, but I'm gonna collect them anyway. So normally when you harvest onions, you're not gonna wanna cut off the tops like I'm doing right now. I'm planning on just chopping them and freezing them, and so it's not a big deal to me, but normally what you would do is wait for the tops to kind of fall over and start to turn brown, which would be about this time for us normally. And then you'd take them out of the soil and let them cure for a while before you remove those tops. If you were with us during our garlic harvest, it's exactly like that. So what I am doing is I'm cutting them off, but I'm also cutting these top parts off. So we had let these onions go to flower, like I mentioned, and once the onion is pollinated, you get these little seeds. Can you see that? Yeah, black seed inside there. So definitely keeping this little bunch. I probably don't need more seed than what one of these little heads is gonna give me, so I'll take those two, but get the rest of these puny little sad onions out of here. So even though this is not the onion harvest that I was really hoping for when I put the sets in the ground, honestly, this is not a total loss. Ultimately, I do have more food than I started out with. The sets were genuinely smaller than this. They're probably about a third of this size, and there are some decently sized onions in here. Plus, I get the benefit from also getting to harvest the seed so that we can start again next year. So we got something out of our investment, and we don't have to pay anything extra in order to try again next year, which I love. I'll worry about clearing out this grass and planting beans on a later date. These sunflowers are absolutely incredible this year. These are sunflowers that we grew from seed that we saved, I think it was in 2020. I'm noticing that they look like really different varieties as well. You see this one is a little bit more light yellow with a yellow inside, and then this one is more classic looking with a dark center and darker petals. But you can see here, this is one of the first ones that opened. It's been well pollinated because the bees have really been loving it, and you can see all the seeds that are developed in there. So on the very end of each little seed is this tiny little flower, and that's what the bees go after. There's nectar and there's pollen here, and the bees absolutely love them. And once the flower really starts to bow its head with the weight of that seed, you can kind of take your thumb, like I've done, and just brush the tips of those flowers off, and you can see all of the seed in there. I'm gonna leave this on here for a little while longer before I harvest it. What I'm really looking for is the back of this to turn yellow, and then I know that the seeds have gotten all the nutrition that they're going to out of the plant. And then we can hang on to these heads as like supplemental chicken feed or goat feed throughout the winter. And of course, we're gonna be saving some for seed for next year. We're probably gonna plant a much bigger plot of sunflowers and corn next year. Let's go check out that corn. So back in the garden, I do have a couple different varieties of corn that I'm growing. This is called Bantam sweet corn. I think this is about the height that they're going to get, though they haven't put up their tassels yet. And this is the other variety that we're growing. This is peaches and cream corn. It's had its tassels out, these things, for a couple weeks now, and I've noticed that the little silks are starting to die back. This corn is a sweet corn, so we're going to be eating it fresh. And I don't see that any of the ears are ready to harvest yet, but there's quite a few ears on here. From what I've read, and again, I've only ever grown corn once before, and it was a few years ago, I need to wait for these silks to turn brown before I harvest the ear. See this one? It might be ready, but I don't know. I've decided that we're going to look at it just for science. So I'm going to take the ear and bend it downward. There we go. Okay, this might be a little early, but let's just check. Yeah, it's definitely a little early, as we thought. The kernels are still kind of small and starting to develop, but wow, it looks good still. It's probably about another week-ish, and these will be ready to harvest, so no more early pickings. Oh, I might just eat this like this. That's good. Over here, I've noticed that our peppers are doing quite well. This here is a snacking variety of pepper called candy cane sweet pepper. And this one, my kids really like to eat just kind of as a snack. Whoops! With their lunches and things. I'm gonna pick a few of these, but really with things like this, I kind of like to use the garden as a living pantry. As long as the plant is well cared for and watered, these peppers are gonna stay fresh on there for a really long time. Now that I've picked these, the clock is ticking for me to use these before they start to wilt and go bad. And so generally, unless I'm needing to preserve peppers for some other reason, like to make hot sauce or you know, whatever, I will leave them on the plant and we'll just come out and get them when we need them. So eventually, if I left these peppers on the plant, they would get some really pretty red striping. So we'll be able to see that a little bit later in the season. This is our first year growing Sugar Rush peach peppers. These seeds were actually given to us by a subscriber that lives locally. I have purple Hungarian jalapenos in here. Goodness, those look like they're getting close to being able to be harvested. I have a bell pepper variety in here. I believe this is California Wonder. You see it in there? And then this down here, this is a pepper called Violet Sparkle. It's another like lunchbox style pepper, and it will get a little bit of a purple stripe on it if we leave it on there. So I think I'm gonna leave those because that's cool to see. This is another bell pepper in here. Okay, over here are the series of beds that I've been calling the nightshade beds because I've got peppers, tomatoes, and eggplants going on in here. So my eggplants look kind of crazy. There's a lot of little tiny holes and the leaves are kind of brown. They've been dealing with some pretty serious, there they are, they're flea beetles. And the plants are doing okay despite that. Let's see if I can catch it on camera without breaking it off. Look. There's a little tiny eggplant coming on down here. I have been treating these plants with diatomaceous earth, but it's been raining off and on, and diatomaceous earth essentially is rendered ineffective when it rains or when you get a heavy dew, which is every morning here. And so these plants don't look great, but they're producing regardless. This one actually doesn't look too bad. So I don't know what kind of a harvest we're really going to get out of them, but it's going to be at least a couple different eggplants. I threw some bush beans here in this bed, and we're starting to get a few little tiny baby beans. I think these are contender bush beans, which this is my first year growing those. So I told you we had peppers growing in this bed too. There they are. It's another snacking variety. Do you see what I see? These tomatoes down here are my favorite cherry tomato variety. These are called Super Sweet 100, and I gave away last year all of the starts that I had for Super Sweet 100, and when I realized it, I was pretty sad. So I made sure to get some in the garden this year, and they're starting to ripen. These guys, even though it's been raining a lot, they haven't cracked, which is great. They're really resistant to disease, really resistant to cracking, and I feel like they have a really great acidity and umami flavor. Even though I could, I'm not gonna be harvesting those today. I know that the next couple days are gonna be nice and sunny here, and those tomatoes are gonna taste a lot better if I let them dry out a little bit. Right now, they're gonna be a little bit waterlogged, and that just kind of dilutes the flavor. I'm over here just trying to pick beans, and I'm getting eaten by my asparagus. I have about 3 feet of space in between these rows here in the raised bed garden, but some plants, it doesn't matter. They just do what they want. You can see that the asparagus berries are on here and starting to ripen. They're turning a little bit here. I noticed I had some red ones on the other side. So as a reminder, asparagus berries are toxic. Don't allow anybody to eat them. See some of them over here. They're starting to turn red, which should mean that the seed inside is ripening as well. And a lot like the onion seeds, these asparagus seeds are ripe when they are black. We're not going to do anything with them. I don't need to grow any asparagus from seed. We've got lots of it growing from crowns, but consequently, just as a byproduct of letting them do their thing, some seed is inevitably going to fall. The birds are going to carry it places, and we may find some surprise asparagus somewhere in the garden or on the farm some other year. Another seed that I'm noticing would be good for harvesting if it wasn't so wet. I don't want to harvest this coriander while it's this wet, but coriander is actually a result of a cilantro plant going to flower and going to seed. And so we get a lot of cilantro every year because we planted it one time and let it flower, and cilantro is just kind of one of those plants that loves and loves to come back. Right next to that cilantro is some borage, and I like to grow borage every year because it's really pretty. It's super unique looking, and the plant is edible. It tastes a lot like a cucumber. It's kind of hairy, so it's a little bit difficult to get past that, but these pretty little flowers. I have a goal of one of these years, this year might be the year, we'll have to see, of putting these in ice cubes and just making like a fancy drink. Earlier today, I actually made a cucumber tomato salad. It's one of our favorite things to make during the summer because we have a lot of both of those things coming in. And really, I feel like these borage flowers would be a really great addition to any kind of summer salad like that. Plus, the bees love them, and that's always a bonus. A couple days ago, it looked like a lot of the ripe berries were getting taken by birds, but it looks like it's not most of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a different type of harvest basket. This one has holes that are way too big, and I am actually gonna take some of these today. See, there's quite a few ripe berries on here. What I'm looking for is nice dark black. Some of them are kind of in transition and some of them are still green. So when I go ahead and preserve these, I'm gonna try to make an elderberry syrup. I'm only gonna go for the black ones. A lot like the sunflowers, when the elderberry is good and ripe and ready to harvest, the whole head just kind of points downward and is nice and heavy with those super dark berries. But if you are having issues with birds getting your elderberries, like I kind of am this year, I have heard that the flowers contain some of the same benefits as the berries, and you don't have to fight the birds for them. These kind of start to degrade pretty quickly after being harvested. So what I'm going to do is actually put the whole thing, I'm just going to stuff these in a Ziploc bag and shove them straight into the freezer, and then I can deal with them when I have time. And I can keep adding them to the freezer as the season goes on and deal with them all at once too. Over here is our sweet potato bed. It's still doing its thing. There's really nothing that I have to do to maintain this bed besides keep it watered. Starting to get some flowers. You can really tell based on the flower shape that sweet potatoes are in the morning glory family. They're delicious. They need to stay in the ground about 100 to 120 days, and we're definitely not there yet. It'll be around September-ish when we do our sweet potato harvest. But during the year, it is important for me to keep these greens trimmed back. The greens are definitely edible, so I don't have to just trim them and put them in the compost. You can, but they're really good in stir fries. They're very spinach-like. They're nice and like substantial. They're not bad fresh. In my opinion, they're better when they're sauteed, but by keeping these greens trimmed back, it's gonna keep the plant focused on getting and growing bigger tubers, which is really what is my ultimate goal. So with this particular bed, I'm just gonna make sure that I weed whack around it and keep these greens contained, and that's gonna give us nice big potatoes at the end of the year. Lots of fun stuff happening here on the lane. As you can see, we've got some pretty decently sized watermelons on here. These are far from being ripe. These are sugar baby watermelons, and this seed is actually quite old. It was from 2019, but we got a decent germination. Anyway, these are gonna get at least twice as big, maybe 3 times as big, but there is a little trick to telling when a watermelon is ripe, and it does not involve tapping it or, you know, having a little sunspot on it or anything like that. What we're gonna do when it comes time, and you can do this throughout the season just to keep track, is follow the stem back to the vine, and right across the street from the fruit is this little curlicue. See that? And this curlicue, it's eventually going to start to die on the end, and when it is dead all the way back to the vine, that's when you know that the fruit straight across from it is ready to pick. As I mentioned, all of this fruit is far from that, but it is very, very easy to accidentally pick an underripe watermelon, and there's almost nothing as sad as that. It's edible. It tastes a lot like a cucumber. Actually, I accidentally pulled off a watermelon out of the kids' garden a couple days ago, and I opened it up for you. So here's a picture of an underripe watermelon. You can eat it, like I said, but we gave it to the chickens and they had a real good time with it. There's quite a few other varieties of melon that I have growing out here. A couple of them have started to give me the tiniest little fuzzy melons. Let's see. Here's one. So this looks almost like a kajari, but it's kind of fuzzy. So I'm almost wondering if this is our armpit melon. The armpit melon, if you weren't with us last year, is a melon that I accidentally grew. It was a hybrid melon between a kajari melon and a cantaloupe type Charente melon. And it looked like a kajari on the outside, just a little bit whitewashed, and it was orange on the inside. Normally kajaris are green on the inside. And I called it the armpit melon because it clearly had that musk. It was definitely in the muskmelon family, but also super fruity. So it kind of smelled like someone had been outside, maybe weeding the garden or mowing, getting kind of sweaty, and instead of taking a shower, they just put on more deodorant. It was a lot like that. So it's the armpit melon. There's quite a few F2 second generation armpit melons growing out here. I don't know which plant is which, but we will find out in time. I also planted Minnesota midget. I may have planted honeydew out here. Oh, there's kajari. Here we go. This is a baby kajari melon, and this one eventually will ripen to where the light green parts are white and those dark green parts are orange. And as I mentioned, the inside flesh is green. It's super good too. It's Levi's favorite thing that we grow. Hello, handsome. How you doing, my sweets? You're being a good boy. Yeah, you're quite round. You're quite round. So our spaghetti squash over here is doing really well for now. I did notice that at least two out of the 3 plants did have some squash vine borer damage down at the base. I'm gonna run around to the other side of the lane so I can show you what that looked like. Kind of heartbreaking, but it was only a matter of time. You can see evidence here that I was over here trying to clear things up, but we do have some pretty large spaghetti squash on here. These are not mature enough to be at a storage phase right now, and so I don't know how long this particular plant is going to live. There's a whole bunch of squash on here, look. That one might not be the one that had the vine borer damage. No, it was this one. So I've been down here fixing things, and so it's a little bit hard to tell, but this plant has been ravaged by a squash vine borer. You can tell because there'll be kind of a hole. It almost looks like a slit sometimes in the plant, but there'll be almost this wood chip type material around it. I believe it's called frass, and that's just a result of the borer kind of boring its way through and spitting out the refuse out of the plant. So you can't see that on this particular plant right now because I've been in here cleaning it up. There was actually a couple spots on this plant where we had vine borer, and I did use a scalpel and pull out a couple borers, because you can do that. If your attempts at spraying on things like BT fail and a borer does wind up inside the plant, you can very carefully cut open where you can see that the borer went in. Very often they're not that far from where you have that hole with the frass, and you can pull them out and hopefully save the plant. This happens to us every year, so I'm kind of not really counting on getting these guys to storage size, but it's not for not trying. We're gonna try until the bitter end. One of the good things though is that there are a couple different varieties of squash and squash-like things that we can grow here that really are very minimally affected by squash bugs and squash vine borers. And tromboncino squash is definitely one of those. I believe it's 3 tromboncino squash that we have growing here, and they are producing very well. I plan on leaving every single one of these on here to get to its full maturity. You can pick it when they're small and green like this and use it just like a summer squash. And the reason I'm not doing that is I have a whole bunch of other squash that is summer squash specific. So I'm gonna use those for summer squash and get these guys maturing for winter squash, because I think this is the only winter squash I'm really going to be able to get to storage size and storage maturity. The second thing that's squash-like, it's actually a gourd that we can grow without really having it be affected by our common pests here, is birdhouse gourd. So we got a look at that earlier on in the video, and those gourds I'm going to leave on to make birdhouses out of. But the birdhouse gourd that's growing out here on the lane, these we're actually going to harvest and eat. We tasted some last week. They taste a lot like cucumber, but a really different texture, a lot more like a firm summer squash in texture. I'm super excited about this. As you can see, we've got some open flowers. These guys are actually pollinated by a nocturnal moth, so they are open in the evening. Sometimes when I see them and I'm out here, I'll just do what I can to pretend to be a moth, take this male flower and meet the female flower with it, kind of just ensure that we're gonna get some fruit. And that one's already been pollinated, probably last night or the night before, so that little flower, it's gonna fall off eventually. There's one down here. These guys grow real fast. The perfect eating size for these is 5 inches or under. They get bigger than that, their seeds are starting to form, and I honestly don't know what they're like at that point. I've only tasted one and it was about 5 inches long. I'm 99% sure that this is armpit melon. You see how it kind of looks like a kajari, but it's less contrast and it's a lot more fuzzy? That's armpit. So the armpit melon that I grew last year was technically an F1 hybrid, and those genes just aren't stable. And so I really don't know what those are gonna be like this year. It's kind of anyone's guess. I'm excited to take you along on that ride though. Our gherkin cucumbers have been producing very well. I've already done a batch of pickles, see? Even though I'm out here picking every day, there's the one that got away from me for at least a couple days. The top is really the size that I'm going for. The bottom, we're just gonna use that for fresh eating. We could pickle it, but I have a really hard time with my home canned pickles really being kind of just mushy. Even though I use pickle crisp, I have done the low temp pasteurization method for canning up your pickles. I just can't get them to be nice and crisp. So we're trying these this year as kind of a last ditch effort to ensure a nice crisp pickle. I'll be sure to report back. We've come down here in the mornings, the past couple garden tours, and besides some like distant crickets and the occasional cow, it's eerily quiet in here. The bees have all gone to bed for the evening, but the fruits of their labor are definitely here. I've had these 2 scallop squash plants going for quite a while. I was in here doing a little bit of pruning. We're starting to see some weird moldy stuff going on, and this does happen, but I don't want to keep it. See, the bottom of this has kind of a spent blossom that's kind of gross and squishy. All you really have to do is wipe it off. Good as new. There's one like in the middle there, so I gotta put you down. Someone had asked me recently how many summer squash we've gotten off of these 2 plants, and in the beginning you kind of count because it's all really exciting. You haven't seen fresh summer fruit like that in a really long time, but we're definitely past the counting phase, but we're not tired of it yet. Over here, I'm really hoping that we have the possibility of getting some of these hybrid sugaretti spaghetti squash to come to a harvestable stage. I have seen and killed a squash vine borer hanging out around this plant, and so I haven't noticed that any issues have come up with this plant, and I'm hoping that that stays that way. We've got at least 2 decently sized fruit. Look at that. But again, it's not harvestable stage yet. They're going to be ready to harvest for long-term storage when those rinds are nice and firm, where my thumb can't pierce that rind, and ideally when the stem that attaches it to the plant is starting to turn brown. We're a ways away from that here, but oh, they're big and beautiful. Our black-eyed peas are really starting to do their thing, and I've noticed that a couple of the pods are getting very close to being able to be harvested. They're not quite ready though. I need to wait for the pods to get dry and brown, and then I'll know that the beans, or the field peas on the inside, will be ready for storage. There's a lot of firsts for us, even though this is our 5th garden season. We decided to plant a lot of things this year that we haven't planted before, and field peas is one of them. I heard it mentioned before, and I kind of agree, that it's a little bit difficult to grow carby things. It's decently easy to grow stuff that doesn't have a whole bunch of carbs in it, but carby things, it's hard to grow a good quantity of. So we have these here. This is a 30-foot row. They are tall, like it goes all the way up to the purlin and then beyond, and the purlin is about 7 feet up. Truthfully, I don't know how much yield we're going to be getting out of this 30-foot row here, but we're gonna learn together. Hopefully it's enough for a good handful of meals, fingers crossed. And then over on this side, it's probably about 15 feet, give or take, and these are purple hull pink eye peas. They aren't purple hulled quite yet. I'm guessing that maybe they will turn purple instead of like a yellow like the other ones are doing. And little peas on the inside are like a creamy white, a lot like the black-eyed peas, but there's like a pink spot instead of a black spot. So we've got these here too, and I'm pretty excited about them. Another first for us here are these lima beans, and I'm loving the look of them. We plan to use these in kind of a pickled bean salad, if you've seen those at the store. I really wanted these for their texture and their color. They're just beautiful, and we have a few plants. We had intended to have this whole row be lima beans, but we didn't have an amazing germination in the beginning of the year, but that's okay. Our spring was very, very wet, and I have heard that beans don't really like to germinate when it's wet, and I can say that that's probably true. See, we're getting some pretty limas regardless. We're definitely getting more than we put in the ground, and that's a good thing. Those are good goals to have. See, a lot like what I'm going to need to do with the black-eyed peas. I'm waiting for these limas to get brown and dry. They're not super crispy, probably because it's pretty humid, but they're definitely ready to harvest. At least a lot of these are. There are some green ones and yellowish ones still here on the plant. I'm going to leave those. I'm only going to take the ones that are ready to be harvested. Oh, the sun is starting to set on the garden tour for this week. I am very excited that this harvest basket is getting heavier and heavier week by week. Truth be told, we're gonna have to bust out the wagon when those melons start coming on. I'm really excited about this garden season, guys. Thank you so much for coming into the garden with me tonight. Let me know if there's anything specific that you want me to cover as far as food preservation goes. I made some videos last year that I'm gonna link here. There's one on preserving tomatoes. There's one on preserving peppers. So I'm gonna leave those 2 videos right here. Give one of them a click if you'd like to, and let me know if there's anything specific you'd like to see a preservation video on.